Hi, we are here in Venice in Peggy Guggenheim collection in a room entirely dedicated to Jackson Pollock paintings. In a few minutes we will interview Philip Rylance, the director of the museum. Can you tell us something about the future exhibitions linked to Peggy Guggenheim collection?
Next year in particular, well, two things come to mind. One is that Claire Falkenstein, an artist from California, created for Peggy in 1961 her extraordinary gates. They were considered outrageous at the time. Now they're very much part of our legend. Gates made of iron with Venetian glass trapped inside the iron network. And they tell the whole story about the museum, a place of contemporary art, of fantasy, of fable, of something set apart from reality and so on. Well, finally, we will do a homage to Claire Falkenstein, who risked for a while disappearing from the art historical canon. Now she's coming back. She in fact had an extraordinary career between New York, Paris, San Francisco, Los Angeles. She was a very innovative artist, and it's well worth our while to make what will, I think, be a very beautiful show, paying homage to her. And for the occasion we'll actually restore the gates, the entrance gates of Peggy's collection, which, being outdoors, need every now and then substantial maintenance. So we'll have two events. We'll have the celebration of those gates and then the celebration of Claire Falkenstein. And then again in the autumn, opening November the 11th, we'll show Tancredi. Tancredi, young artist from the Veneto, actually from Feltre, whom Peggy helped a lot in the 1950s. She sold his works abroad, she gave him studio space. He was, in a way, one of her creati, as Vasari might say. And perhaps a long overdue homage will be given to Tancredi, a painter much loved in the Veneto, always deserving of a bigger international reputation, and that's perhaps what we can offer him with our very numerous international public. And in between that, we'll have various shows, various presentations of Peggy's collection of post-war art, of Italian art. I'm thinking in particular of a show during the summer which will be quite extraordinary. Imagine, the title of the show, looks at the figurative component of Italian art. We're so used to looking at monochromes by Fontana, with more or less punched and slashed, and so on. But there is a figurative component in the avant-garde in Italy in the 60s, and that's what we'll look at as a kind of alternative to previous shows we've done, which are focused on Fontana or Azimuth, the Milanese avant-garde with Manzoni and Castellani and so forth. So that'll be a little piece of art history, which will also have, the pleasure certainly for our Italian visitors and everyone else, of showing a lot of works of art which are celebrated in the history books, very rarely seen, masterpieces in their own right.
Wonderful. So we've just talked about the future, and now talk about the present. We are here in this beautiful room dedicated to Jackson Pollock. But which is the difference between contemporary art and classic art?
Peggy Guggenheim herself loved classic art. She read Berenson in the 1920s and visited all the museums of Europe with Berenson in her hand and a nephew of Joseph Duveen by her side. So she started out from Carpaccio and Titian, I'm thinking especially of the Venetian classics, Tintoretto and so forth. When she came to think about participating in the art world in an active way, it was Samuel Beckett who convinced her that it should be contemporary art as it was a living thing. So Peggy took this on as her mission. So I think it's worth knowing that Peggy's idea was not simply to collect for herself or to decorate her apartments or to spend surplus cash, because she didn't have surplus cash, but really to help living artists and at the same time to make a museum. Peggy's collection is art of her century. In fact, she gives her gallery in New York the title Art of this Century, and of course we're talking about the 20th. And she, in the middle of the 20th century, set out to represent the main avant-gardes up until that time. Now, the avant-garde in which she operated was small, embattled, not widely loved by a huge public as it is today. It was a very different kind of avant-garde, which arguably did grow out of the 19th century, as the 19th century arguably grew out of the 18th century. So I would argue for a continuity, even if sometimes the thread of continuity gets very slight, as it did when Picasso paints his Demoiselle d'Avignon and almost cuts the thread, but not quite, because there was Cézanne behind him and so forth. But still, let's assume there is a kind of continuity there. And in any case, modern painting, the painting was modern at the time it was painted, was always predicated on sculpture and paintings, plus drawings, and then eventually photography gets involved. But nonetheless, it was painted based on the object. Well, that changes in the late 1960s, when at what one begins to feel was a kind of exhaustion of that whole tradition of placing painting and sculpture at the head of the avant-garde. Conceptual art changes all that, really. Perhaps we should go back to Warhol's Brillo boxes, when the barrier, when the difference between reality and art broke down totally. So at that point, there was no longer any definition of what art is. Peggy knew what art was, but I don't think anybody else does now, since the conceptual revolution of the late 1960s. So now, instead of the painting and the sculpture, at the head of the avant-garde is, as we know, video, performance, land, installation, political documentation, all kinds of things, which really have nothing to do with Peggy. And I would argue, to bring us back to Peggy, that one of the great pleasures people have in visiting this museum is they're enormously reassured to see paintings and sculptures. I mean, remarkable ones. And I think people find now that that has a level of aesthetic payback, aesthetic pleasure.
How art can help people to live in a better way?
Well, I think whenever it's a bit like watching a sports match, a game of tennis or something. It takes you outside yourself. You kind of, for a moment, no longer have to worry about who you are, because you're suddenly involved in a completely different world which is alien to yourself, and you draw from that pleasure, whether it's the competitiveness of sports or the aesthetic qualities of works of art. And that's another reason why people like visiting this museum, because the aesthetic component, the beautiful colors, just for one thing, is very strong, and why people struggle with other kinds of contemporary art in which the aesthetic component has been thrown aside. So I think that the fact that it takes you outside yourself is very good for your hormones. I mean, you just feel good. There's something released inside, as it is when you do running or sport, when you watch sport, or when you go to museums, learn something. You know the phrase, you know the saying, if you feel unhappy, learn something, and you'll feel better. A fact a day, or something like that. Yes. So people come here for that kind of stimulation and being, as you say, reassuring themselves in an existential manner. That the world is not completely and desperately internal to oneself.
We can leave our public saying this if you are unhappy, yes, you
come to the Peggy Guggenheim collection.
Of course.